Ducks fans, are you ready? You are listening to the Ducks and Pucks podcast with your hosts, Mike Walters and Eddie Jones. This is the #1 home for Anaheim Ducks talk and analysis. Here we go.
Welcome to the show. This is your host, Mike Walters, along with my co-host, Eddie Jones. And, well, the Ducks season is over, everybody. We are here with the podcast that we didn't think we were going to have to record, but we got to record it because you got questions and we got questions, and hopefully we have some answers that'll help you out as we analyze the Ducks now. Basically, Eddie, going into the off season, unfortunately, the Ducks lost to Nashville in 6 games. They split the first 2 at home. They split the next 2 on the road in Nashville, but lost games 5 and 6, Eddie. Not where we wanted to be, and obviously everybody out there, we know you feel the same way, but we're going to go over the series a little bit and address some fan questions. Your initial reaction, Eddie, to the series?
Yeah, I think initially it was disappointment. I think along with everybody was disappointed, but when we look back to the beginning of the season and even during the regular season, I think a lot of us were just going to be happy if the Ducks made the playoffs. And I don't think any of us expected them to go this far. But in the moment, when you're there and you have a chance of winning another cup, it's disappointing, of course. I think the Ducks definitely could have won this series, especially with Nashville losing Ryan Johansson. And I think they did a great job of being able to replace him with some of the depth forwards that they have. But it's definitely disappointing. And obviously, the time is running out for the core of this team. Everybody's getting older, and I think they've maybe got a couple more seasons left where they can work some things around to make a push. But I really think they had a shot at doing it this year. I think that's the most disappointing part about it.
Yeah, and like we talked about, on the podcast before, previewing the series, we thought it would go 6 or 7 games, and we knew it was going to be tough. We thought the Ducks could pull it out, in that kind of fashion, and really, the way Game 6 went, I thought they were going to, go to overtime or win it, force a Game 7, especially late in that game. But looking at this series, the first 2 games, the Ducks split. And most of these games, Eddie, were basically what you and I predicted. They were the 2-1 type games, the 3-2, 1-goal games. Almost all these games were like that. Even Game 6, because of some empty net goals, that was a 1-goal game. The Ducks ended up losing Game 1, 3-2. That was, disappointing in the first game because Nashville had come at the Ducks with so many shots on net. In that game, they had 46, and they ended up edging out the Ducks by a goal. And then the only game that was really irregular, as far as what you and I talked about, was Game 2. The Ducks came out and ended up winning this one, 5-3. So you had a little bit of craziness there. We had talked about how the Ducks had played Nashville in the regular season. All 3 games were, just high-scoring affairs. So we saw that in Game 2, but not in Game 1. Things looked okay. The Ducks, were going to go to Nashville tied. It looked like they'd be fine. But then again, it was just weird how these games went, Eddie. It seemed like they would flip-flop kind of the way the Ducks' performances went. Because then the Predators came back and won Game 3, 2-1. And then the Ducks came back and, they did the push in Game 4. So through those first 4 games, it was just kind of weird. It seemed like, the Ducks probably could have won 3 of those 4 games, but they're a little bit inconsistent in their play through those first 4.
Yeah, I think that's fair to say. And really, they had some chances. They had a lot of shots. But they didn't really have a lot of finish in some of these games. And Nashville made it close. Rene made it tough for them as well. But yeah, I mean, when you look at the big guys for each team and who stepped up, you have to give the edge to Nashville, and especially Philip Forsberg. I mean, especially when Johansson went down, he continued to play well. I think he had a point in every game in this series and almost had a goal in every game except for Game 5 where he had an assist. But you got to give kudos to them for them being able to step up. At times we had guys like Raquel who stepped up. Richie played good in a couple games, had some big goals. Perry had a big overtime goal as well. But you look at a guy like Ryan Kessler, didn't really step up this series, struggled to shut down that Forsberg, Johansson, Arvidsson line when they were together, and struggled to shut down Forsberg when they weren't together. And Getzlaf, barring the game where he had 3 assists, he looked good in some of those games. He made some good plays, but there was no finish, and it's just disappointing. I think this team had a chance and they kind of let it slip away.
Yeah, and I think that was really evident in games 3 and 4. on the road. I mean, you had game 3, the Ducks were ahead going into the third. They gave up those 2 goals. They ran over Gibson too and had a couple called back, but it looked like the Ducks, were going to maybe survive, go to overtime. Of course, there's, the late penalty called on Chris Wagner, and, Yoshi scores, and that's the game-winning goal, which, that penalty, I mean, Wagner got a stick up, but I mean, I don't know. I thought it was kind of a ticky-tack one, and then they score, whatever. So, the Ducks couldn't hang on in that game. And then in game 4, the Ducks had a 2-goal lead, and then Nashville came back in the third period, and they forced overtime. The Ducks were able to manage and win. So I think that was huge, for Nashville, because they were able to come back. They played okay in periods 1 and 2, and the Ducks were able to get these leads, but the Ducks just couldn't hang on. And if they were able to hang on and win game 3, and then obviously game 4, I mean, we would be here talking about the Ducks playing Pittsburgh or Ottawa. I think I really think that game 3 was huge for them to lose, and I mean, it was huge for them to win too. But it just sucks because you feel like the Ducks could have had control of this series, Eddie, after 4 games. They really could have won 3 of these 4 games.
Yeah, and I think the big ones are definitely game 3, like you said. I think they got that third lead going into the third period. They had it going late, and even with the goal for Nashville to tie the game, it was just a bad penalty in the offensive zone, and that's where you don't want to be taking penalties. Wagner gets the stick up, and he does hit him, and that is a penalty that they're going to call, and it's just disappointing they end up getting the goal on the power play, and that's the decider in the game. And really, that's where you got to be disciplined, shut down defensively, and win the game. And they weren't able to do it. And I think, like you said, that was a big turning point in that game. That's a game you should have won. And then obviously last night's game, in Game 6, they outshot them, I think, 41-18. And most of the time you're gonna win those games. And obviously the scoreline looks a little bit weird with it being 6-3. Obviously 2 of them were empty netters, but that's a game you have to win. And we'll go into it in a little bit on why we think they lost and what, who's to blame and whatnot. But that's definitely a game that you should have won. The way they played in that game, they played great. They got back into it, tied the game, and to ultimately lose with a late goal. I think that's definitely, obviously looking at it now, it's the big one in this series.
Well, and I think if we take one step back, we'll go fully into that one, and we go to Game 5, looking at this too. This is another one that the Ducks, they played decent. They could have won this game, at home, and I hate to say it, and we don't want to be like some of these other fans out there and complain about penalty calls and all these other things, but in this situation, you had Manson get high sticks, bleeding, no call. Then play goes on. He gets called for a cross check. Not saying it wasn't a cross check, but he gets called for that. Nashville scores. That ends up being the game-winning goal in Game 5. And that's just completely frustrating, Eddie, because if they would have called the double minor like they should have, that other, the series of events would have been changed from then on. They wouldn't have, I don't know. They may or may not have won, but it just would have been a different, the way it would have gone. And I can't stand when there's a non-call and then a call and then a goal results out of it too. I mean, it's just that whole chain of events. It's just very frustrating to me. Not saying that Nashville didn't deserve to win Game 5, but it's just frustrating because it totally changed the momentum of that game, and you could see it from that point on, Eddie.
Yeah, and we saw that in the game where the Ducks went down 2-0. I think it was Game 2. Where Vatanen scored a late power play goal in the first period, and then the momentum shifted going into the second, and the Ducks got 2 quick goals, and they ended up ultimately winning that game. And that's kind of the similar situation in this one. Obviously, the Ducks were up 2-0 late in the second period. The high stick from Forsberg gets missed. Manson's bleeding on the ice. He gets revenge, and it was a dumb penalty to take. And let's be honest, obviously he's a little bit pissed off, and he's a heated guy. And I don't blame him for trying to get revenge on Forsberg and being a little bit pissed off. I'd be pissed off too. And the refs definitely missed a call, but you take a penalty late and they get a goal in the final minute on the power play, and they go into the third period and they look like a new team. And the Ducks didn't really play great in that third period, and it showed. They didn't have a lot of finish. They didn't get a lot of chances. Nashville was shutting down, and once Nashville got that 2-1 goal in the third period, it was pretty much game over. They played great, shut down the neutral zone, not many chances, and then Austin Watson sealed it with an empty netter. And it's just the way it went in this series. The Ducks they were taking dumb penalties. There were some missed calls in this one, especially that led to chances at the other end for both teams, and then ultimately it hurt them in the end.
Yeah, and I might have misspoke on that penalty. It wasn't the game-winning goal that Nashville scored, but it was the game-tying goal, as you talked about, and then it shifted the momentum around into the third. That's what I said earlier. But yeah, like you said, the penalties. The Ducks definitely weren't as disciplined in this series as they needed to be in all of these games. We saw that, and we even saw it. We'll talk about Game 6. We saw it in there. I mean, the first period, the Ducks got down 2-0 in Game 6. And you thought, okay, the Ducks were still putting on pressure. They were getting more shots. It looked like they were going to get back into it. And then Nick Ritchie, gets a 5-minute boarding penalty and he's gone. And, and don't get me wrong, I'm not going to argue this call, whatever. He hit the guy face first into the boards. He's bleeding. I mean, it's pretty evident of what it is. But when you see the missed call against Manson before, and then you see this, that's just frustrating. I mean, it is what it is. But the Ducks were able to kill that 5-minute major penalty off. I don't even think Nashville got a shot. Maybe they got like one in that whole sequence. I don't even remember what it was. But the Ducks were able to survive that. They come out of the first period down 2-0. They play a great second period. They only get one goal. And you thought they had a chance. Then they go down 3-1. And then they still come back and they tie it. And they tie it at 3-3. You think everything's good. And then, lo and behold, Nashville gets another goal shortly after that. Makes it 4-3, and the Ducks can't recover. And I mean, it's just a frustrating game. I remember we were at El Ranchito in Orange watching this game, and we were going nuts when it was 3-3. I mean, everybody was jumping up and down, going crazy. And then to see that next goal really deflated it, and it just you just kind of knew at that point. And then of course the easy empty net of the first one, that was it. And I mean, you got to be happy with this team, though, Eddie. They showed so much fight. They had no Eves, no Raquel in this game, no Gibson, and yeah, Nashville didn't have some of their players too, which I don't know why the national media likes to focus on their team so much and how shorthanded they were, but we were shorthanded too. We had two of our top scorers out, and for the Ducks to fight it out the way that they did in Game 6, you have to be proud of it. At least the team as a whole, Eddie.
Yeah, and I get where you're coming from on that too, and a lot of the focus was on Nashville losing Johansson, and that was pretty much it for them, and that's a huge loss. Don't get me wrong; they're losing their number one center. They don't really have much depth after that. But to be honest, losing Mike Fisher isn't really, obviously it's losing your captain, but 0 points
struggled
in 12 games for him.
Yeah.
It's like if we lost Vermette. You're losing a defensive forward who's not going to do much for you. It's not a big loss for them. They lost Kevin Fiala before, but they have the depth to lose a role player like that. But for the Ducks, there wasn't a lot of talk about them losing 2 30-goal scorers, and of course their number one goaltender going into Game 6, and that's a loss that's hard to overcome. And I think they did a great job in this game. I mean, they played a great game, arguably their best game of the playoffs, and they lost 6-3. They outshot Nashville 41-18. They killed off a 5-minute power play and allowed. NHL.com says they allowed no shots on any of the power plays for Nashville in this game. It's hard to believe, but it comes down to goaltending. And I don't want to jump on Bernier, and a lot of people have been in saying it's his fault in this game, but it's hard to look the other way. There were some poor goals, especially early on in the first period, the 2 that he allowed in, and then the second Sissons goal where he's jamming it on the side of the net, and he didn't cover it. It's just tough. It's a tough game to lose when you play so well, dominant in the faceoff dot. You obviously don't get anything going on the power play, and that's on you. But, I mean, it's tough. They battle back, tie the game. They don't get a 5-on-3, and that puck did clip the glass heading out. But the call goes the other way. And Sissons comes down the other ice and scores the hat-trick goal. And, that's a dagger. 6 minutes to go in the game. You give up the 4-3 goal, and it's going to be hard to come back. Nashville's a great team. They shut down the neutral zone, and the Ducks didn't really get many chances going into those final 5 minutes of the game. And Forsberg gets the empty net goal, and from there, it's pretty much over. It would have been tough for the Ducks to get 2 goals the way Nashville was playing. And then Watson gets the second empty netter, and it's season over for the Ducks.
I think the thing that was weird about this, and you touched upon a little bit in the goalie situation, was the Ducks had tweeted out that Gibson was back in net and he was practicing. He looked good, everything in the morning. We even thought he was going to start. That's what it sounded like from what a lot of people were saying. And then last minute Bernier comes in. We found out that Gibson had a hamstring issue, so he must not have been able to go side to side or laterally like he needed to be, because for him to not come in was strange. Because then Bernier comes in, Enros the backup. You're like, what the hell's going on here? And like you said, you don't want to put all the blame on Bernier in this game, but you got to put a lot of the blame on him. I'm sorry, he came in there and was not prepared. And I'll play devil's advocate too. I mean, he hadn't played, a whole lot in the last, month and a half, 2 months. I mean, I get it, but some of those goals he let in, I mean, it was terrible. I mean, the Predators had 18 shots. We don't count the empty netters, but four of those goals, a couple of them Bernier could have stopped. Let's just be honest. And I don't think the team wanted to come out and say it because they didn't want to point the finger at the end. But we all know. You watched the game. You saw what happened. Bernier was so rusty. It was terrible. And me, I mean, we'll kind of go into it later, but there'll be some fan questions about Gibson and Bernier and Enroth and things that we'll talk about. But in this situation, I think it was tough. You're missing your two 30-goal scorers, as you talked about, Eddie, and then your number one goalie's out, and you've got a rusty backup that comes in and, kind of deflates the team early on and then deflates the team in the third period. And like I said, I'm not going to put it all on him, but you can't ignore the fact that his performance was very subpar in this game, unfortunately.
Yeah, and Bernier arguably lost them this game, but
Yeah.
it takes a team to lose a series. And
Yes.
let's not
Yes.
forget the Ducks lost 4 games in this series, and Bernier only played in 1. So there's an issue there, and you got to look at each game. We already looked at them briefly, but they're gonna have to look at this and prepare for next year. It's a tough loss to handle. A lot of people thought the Ducks could move on from this series, especially when Ryan Johansson went down. And a lot of people were saying there's no excuses now. The Ducks are gonna have to go out and win game 5 and 6, and they lost both of them. So
Yep.
you got to look at yourselves internally on that one, and prepare for next season. Will we see Bernier next season? I don't know. He's an unrestricted free agent. There might be a new backup behind Gibson next year, but we'll get into the Gibson talk in a little bit. But there's a lot of people that have been putting him under fire as well, heading out of this season.
Yeah, and with that, we have just a ton of fan questions, obviously, given what happened. All kinds of crazy comments have been flying all over the internet. I woke up today and it was fun getting on social media today. I'm going to tell you, I honestly went to bed early after the game because I was just tired of seeing all kinds of crazy comments. And, honestly, it's for those of you listening, it's pretty much not you guys. You guys have always been great and been supportive of the Ducks, obviously, and of Eddie and I, and all the fans have been, Ducks fans have been great. But it's just funny to see these fans of other teams, Kings fans, Nashville fans, other random fans come out of the woodwork and want to pound our team and our fans and us and everything. It's just pretty funny. But we'll go into the your questions and concerns. I mean, obviously, there's a lot of stuff going on now that the season's over. Expansion draft, cap issues, who stays and goes, all those kind of things. So we're going to run through the questions. We're not really going to mention like who asked them like we usually do because so many of you asked the same question like the same way almost or close to it. But we're going to run through, try and cover as much as we can here as we look forward. And even before we get to the end of this podcast, we'll have more podcasts throughout the summer. They may be spaced out. Usually Eddie and I try to do one every week, but we're going to try to maybe do one every 2 weeks. Just depends on what's going on. But right now we'll kind of go into some of the stuff with the team and, kind of what to expect now that the season's over. And one of the biggest questions, Eddie, is whether or not Patrick Eaves is going to return to the Ducks. And what are your thoughts on that as we start looking ahead?
Yeah, I mean, a lot of people want him to come back. I think he had a successful season in Anaheim. He played great in Dallas. Had 14 points, 11 goals in 20 games in the regular season with Anaheim, and 4 points in 7 games in the playoffs before he got hurt. And of course, we'd love to have him back, but I think a lot of people got to realize, like, he scored 32 goals last year. That's going to be one of the top guys on the free agent market in terms of goals. Obviously, there's guys in front of him like TJ Oshie, but he's going to be getting more than the $1 million that we paid him this season. And I think if it's upwards of 3 towards 4, which it probably will be, some team will be willing to pay that. A team has a lot of cap. You look at maybe Carolina, who will be looking to make a push this year as well. There's teams who will be willing to pay him money, and I don't think the Ducks should invest in a guy who's only scored 30 goals once in his career. I mean, in the seasons prior to this, he's had some injury troubles, and he hasn't really produced at this level. The last time he scored 20 goals was way back in 2005, 2006, where he had 20 goals and 9 assists in his rookie season with the Ottawa Senators. So, I think they got to be careful. Obviously he meshed well with Getzlaf, but he also meshed well with Ben and Sagan in Dallas. When you're playing with top guys, they're going to get you the puck and you're going to score goals. And that's not to harp on his play, but I think they got to be wary. If you're going to look north of $3 million, I think you got to turn the other way and let him go to a different team.
Yeah, I think that's really the issue, Eddie. It's going to come down to money. I mean, would we, want to have Patrick Eaves back? Absolutely. I think, almost every Duck fan out there is going to say yes. But like you mentioned, the cost is going to be the issue. Like you said, he's going to be one of the highest ones on the free agency market. Even though, given, like you said, playing in Dallas and the Ducks with some great players, obviously, that's going to be a concern. And I agree with you. If the Ducks can keep him for, $1 million, maybe two, you may see some hope there. But I think the chances are slim. I'm not going to say none. I mean, there is a chance because we have the expansion draft and all kinds of other craziness that's going to happen in the off season. But I do think the chances are not great. So I wouldn't hold your breath. I mean, be hopeful, but also be prepared, I guess, for the worst and him not returning.
Yeah, and I think there's some guys out there as well on the free agent market we'll talk about in a bit that you could get for either cheaper or have more consistent value than what Patrick Hughes has provided in the past. You got to remember too, this guy has turned 33 in May, and he's an aging guy, one of the older guys on the Ducks, and it's difficult to to say you're going to want to pay this guy $3 or $4 million for the next 2 seasons. Maybe he takes a cut to stay in Anaheim and win a cup, but there's going to be a lot of teams that are cup contenders that are going to be pushing to grab a guy that can score 30 goals and that's shown he can play with some top players. So I mean, a lot of people want him to come back. I'm among the people that want him to come back, but we got to be realistic and look at the cap situation for this team. And you don't want to end up spending too much on a guy for 2 seasons when you have to, say, re-sign Cam Fowler in a couple seasons, and you got to possibly re-up Cogliano, who's only making $3 million. So you got to look at those as well.
Well, there is a kind of a related question, like you talked about, Eddie. We can kind of go into it. Some people asked about what forward should the Ducks try and target in the offseason. So let's say Eaves doesn't come back. Who out there? It's kind of early. Obviously we got 3 other teams still playing and whatnot. But I mean, what are some names that maybe Ducks fans should kind of, if not, keep an eye on them coming to the Ducks, or maybe going to another team?
So you're looking at some of the ones in the free agent market that it's going to be difficult to get these guys as well for a cheap price. I think the first one you look at is Justin Williams with the Washington Capitals. They're going to have to look at re-signing TJ Oshie, maybe the possibility of them re-signing Kevin Shattenkirk, which I doubt. I believe they also have to re-up Evgeny Kuznetsov as well, so I doubt that Williams comes back. He's getting up there too. He's 35 and was making $3.25 million last year, but he had 48 points in the regular season with the Capitals. We all know that he's Mr. Game 7 in his playoff prowess. But I think he's a good option for the Ducks if they can get him for around $3 million. He's a good top 9 guy, a veteran guy, been there, done that, won the cup before. So I think that's a good option for them to pursue as well. Another one is Chris Versteeg, and we all remember him from the Ducks series where he just kept scoring power play goal after power play goal. And he had a pretty successful season with Calgary, 37 points in 69 games that he played. He was making under $1 million, so he's definitely going to be getting a raise. But I think he's one of those guys that you can still probably get for around $2 million, and he'd be a good guy for the Ducks to have to provide some good scoring depth, something that they kind of lacked, especially in the last few games of this series. And then the last one is a familiar face for most Ducks fans. It's Nick Bonino. He's an unrestricted free agent out of Pittsburgh this season, and he had 37 points in the 80 games that he played. And I think he'd be a suitable guy to bring back and possibly play third-line center if you lose a guy like Nate Thompson, who is an unrestricted free agent, or for some reason you do lose Antoine Vermette either to Vegas in the expansion draft, or you buy him out or trade him or whatever. I think he'd be a good option for the Ducks to have at third-line center. And he only made $2.1 million last year, so I think he might get a little bit of a raise, and it might be difficult for Pittsburgh to keep him around.
I like all 3 of those options you mentioned, Eddie. Obviously, bringing the Boneyard back would be, exciting. I don't know what the chances would be of that, but, we have to see what's happening with Pittsburgh because obviously they're still battling it out with Ottawa. But that one would intrigue me the most. I think Justin Williams might be price range may be an issue. Versteeg too. That's not a bad one. I would look towards Bonino or Versteeg, kind of see where they go. Maybe there's a chance that one of those two guys comes in and helps the Ducks. But because that's another question kind of related to this too is what do the Ducks need to do for next season in order to help out this team? And I think what's going to help this team is getting some more forward depth, because it was kind of the problem in this series, Eddie, is we saw this as the Ducks lost some guys, Nashville lost some guys, and with Anaheim, and you and I talked about this before preparing for the show today, is that they didn't really have third or fourth line guys that could step up as much. I mean, yeah, you did have Chris Wagner get 3 goals, but I mean, you're not going to rely on Bull to come in there and help you out too much. Cordelis, he's brand new coming in. I mean, obviously, maybe in the future, but the Ducks didn't really have that depth in the forward pool. And we talked about that at the trade deadline too, because you remember the Ducks only got Eves; they didn't get anybody else. And I think that's going to be the main focus for this team next season.
Yeah, and it's difficult. I mean, you look at Nashville and the guys that they had come in and play a big role even before Johansson went out in this series. Austin Watson coming into this series versus the Ducks had no goals. He finished it with 4. I believe a couple of them were empty netters, but he still played a big role, blocked a lot of shots in last night's game. And you look at Colton Sissons too. I mean, he has 10 points, a hat trick last night in the game against the Ducks. And they were able to bring in Pontus Aberg, who had a great series and a good goal, a big goal, the game-winning goal against the Ducks. And then Kyle Yarncrook as well is an impactful player for Nashville. They were able to bring these guys up, promote them in the lineup, and they played well. And for the Ducks, losing Raquel and Eves just proved to be too much for them. Obviously, losing Gibson as well, but Wagner came up, got a couple goals, but that was pretty much it from him in the playoffs. Kasha had a couple goals in this series. He had one in last night's game, but that was pretty much it from him in this playoffs as well. And they didn't really have anybody come up besides Getzlaf, Perry, and Silverberg, who really produced at a level that could replace what Raquel was bringing to the lineup, or what Eves was bringing to the lineup, or even just have a little bit of production from other guys. And I think that was a big issue for them, and that's something they're going to have to address in this offseason. You look at signings like Bull and Vermette now, and that wasn't enough. Bringing in Eves was great at the deadline, but it still wasn't enough. You have to look at, if you're going to lose 2 guys from your lineup, who's going to come up and replace them? And I think Kasha was a great surprise, but it just wasn't enough in the end for the Ducks.
Yeah, I agree, and I think part of that tied into the Raquel and Eves thing was the Ducks going to the net. I think that would the Ducks were able to score some goals in Game 6. Don't get me wrong, but especially having Eves out the whole series, Raquel the last game, you didn't have as much of that pressure in front of Arena that the Ducks needed, and I think that was huge. And I'm not trying to make excuses for the Ducks. I still think they could have won the series, but when you don't have that net presence, especially against a top goalie. I mean, you have to give Rene credit. I mean, he beat the team, the Ducks last year, beat us this year. And I mean, he's been on his game. You have to give credit to Nashville's team defense and the way he plays. And when you get into the playoffs, you're going to run into teams like this. We ran into Crawford against Chicago. We ran into Quick in LA. We had these different, and like I said, Rene before. So you run into these goalies that are going to play great. Well, the way you're going to beat these guys, you're going to have forwards. They don't necessarily have to be the biggest guy, but you've got to have forwards that are willing to go in front of the net, create screens, get deflections, and create havoc. And I think that just really hurt the Ducks, especially in the last game. Without Raquel and Eves, those are the 2 guys that were really, going to the net, making plays, and getting the Nashville, trying to get their defense out of position. That's what you need. And I would target forwards that are going to do that kind of role in the offseason. I think that's the best thing, Eddie, that the Ducks can try and do to really improve this team, because the team still did great, down the stretch and everything. Other than specialty teams, that kind of went down the tube in the playoffs. But overall, the team played great.
Yeah, and I think one thing, too, you have to look at, especially with Rene, is for a team to have a goaltender, you see this a lot in Montreal with Carey Price, who can go out and make plays behind the net and does whatever they can to stop the puck and get it an easy out for Nashville. I mean, the amount of times we saw that, where he'd go behind the net, throw his body against the board, stop the puck, give it to a defender, and he'd get out of the zone. I think that was key for Nashville in a lot of games. And in one of the games, especially in Game 5, he did that so many times that the Ducks just couldn't get anything going offensively. And that's credit to, for one, Rene, and two, the fact that Nashville plays so well in the neutral zone that the Ducks have to dump it in every time. And Rene's there to stop the puck 90% of the time, and he gets it out, and it's an easy out. And it's great effort by Nashville to set up their team that way, and it really frustrated the Ducks, and they just couldn't really find a way around it.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, that's really it in a nutshell. Those are some of the things that turned the series around in favor of the Predators, unfortunately. With that though, the season, like we said, the season's over, and the Ducks are going to have to focus now. We've got as you mentioned kind of earlier, the expansion drafts coming up. We've talked about this throughout the season, and obviously a lot of the fans have asked more questions about it, and they're concerned about what are the Ducks going to do. And I encourage everybody to, if you ever want to know about the cap and the Ducks lineup and whatnot, is to go on Cap Friendly and check it out. They have all the players listed on there, and that's what we look at. And they actually have an expansion draft tool on there to use. But we'll kind of go into this again, Eddie. We'll talk about what the Ducks plan to do. We're pretty sure, not 100%, but we're pretty sure the Ducks are going to go with, the first option where they're going to protect 7 forwards and 3 defensemen. And if you look at the way that it's laid out, obviously those that have the no movement clauses have to be protected. So if we look at the forwards, you've got Perry, Getzlaf, and Kessler automatically would be protected. The next group that we're pretty sure would be in that group would be Raquel, Silverberg, and Cogliano. So the Ducks would have at least those 6 protected. And then they would be able to pick a 7th one, which we'll kind of talk about in a minute. The issue comes in on the defense, Eddie, which we've talked about this before. If the Ducks protect 3, they're going to have to figure something out, because you've got Bieksa, who has a no movement clause, which we've heard that he's going to waive for purposes of the draft, which players can do. If he does indeed do that, then the Ducks still have Lindholm, Vatanen, and Fowler to look at, and Manson is another one. So, there's some things here that are going to have to go on, and you and I have alluded to this on several podcasts, Eddie, and this kind of goes into another fan question too, but it looks like in order for the Ducks to do some movement here, satisfy the trade deadline and some of the holes like we talked about in the forwards, I would think the Ducks would try to trade a defenseman for a forward and try and solve all these problems in a move, like maybe 1 or 2 moves like that, Eddie.
Yeah, and we've known this pretty much all season, that this is what was going to happen come expansion draft, and now that it's here, it's more obvious than anything. I mean, if the Ducks were to go the 8 forward / defenseman and 1 goalie route, that would expose a guy like Jakob Silverberg if you're going to protect 4 defensemen, and I'm pretty sure that's not the route that they want to go. The way he played in the regular season, in the playoffs, I'm sure they're going to want to keep him. So then we go the 7 forward, 3 defenseman route, and that protects Perry, Getzlaf, Kessler, and then most likely Raquel, Silverberg, Cogliano, and then a forward of their choice if they acquire a new one through a trade, or if they decide to protect either Vermette or Wagner or Cordelis or whoever they decide to protect. And then you look at defensemen, and this is the big thing. Like you said, there's Lindholm, there's Vatanen, there's Fowler, there's Manson, and then there's Bieksa with the no-move clause, which we either believe he'll waive, and if he doesn't, I'm sure the Ducks will figure out another way, either buying him out, trading him, whatever they decide to do. But I would assume that he would waive it for the purpose of the expansion draft. And then you have to look at arguably 2 guys who would be the most likely to be traded. Lindholm's safe, I would assume. Manson, I believe they'd like to keep at only $825,000 cap hit. And then you have to look at Vatanen and Fowler. And the only reason I include Fowler in this lineup is that he's a UFA next season. He's only making $4 million. I'm sure he's due for a raise, especially the season he had. They're going to look to re-up him on July 1st when they can begin doing so. I'm sure they'd like to get it done this season before next season. And, if they can't work something out, there's also a possibility that he gets traded over Vatanen. But you would have to look at the most likely option being Sami Vatanen. There's been a lot of stirring and rumors lately out of Toronto and Tampa Bay and other teams across the league that they'd be interested in acquiring a defenseman. Colorado's one as well. And Sami Vatanen would be a great option for a lot of teams. And, if the Ducks are going to want to keep some of the forwards that they have here, and especially some of the defensemen, and avoid losing anybody to Vegas, it's time to start trading out of some of this depth and acquiring some forwards in a trade.
Yeah, I agree, and I think Vatanen's your most likely one. Like you said, Fowler could be an issue, maybe, trying to re-up him or whatnot. But if you trade Vatanen, he's 25. You've got Montour, 23. A lot of people argue that Montour's better, and I would go with that too. And he's younger too, a couple years. So you already have an option to plug in there. So and the way Fowler played this last year, I mean, holy cow! I mean, he had a phenomenal season. So that's kind of what we're leaning towards. I mean, that's how it would possibly go, is if the Ducks protect 7 forwards, 3 defensemen, and then of course they would keep the one goalie, John Gibson. Which we have a lot of fan questions about the goalie stuff too, Eddie. Kind of cracks me up. I think this is probably one of the biggest questions we've had in our list of things to go through today. But people want to know about Gibson and his level of goaltending, Eddie. If he's a championship goalie, is he a number one type goalie? And we'll get into the backup situation too in a second. But obviously the Ducks, you would think, would protect him in the expansion draft as the one goalie. But what are your thoughts on Gibson? Because there's some mixed feelings out there amongst some of the Ducks fans about Gibson and his health and et cetera, et cetera. What do you think?
Well, if any question or any comments that got me the most heated after this game and after the season is the fact that people are saying, should we continue to go with John Gibson, or should we promote Bernier, or should we look for another goalie in free agency? And those are fair questions, and the people are citing injury issues with Gibson and whatnot, but we have to look at his play in the regular season this year. He had top 5 numbers in the league, one of the best goaltenders in the regular season. And he struggled a bit in the playoffs, but he still played well. He won games for the Ducks. And you have to remember, this guy's 23 years old. There's not many goalies playing at this level that are that young and playing so well. You got to look at maybe Matt Murray in Pittsburgh and Andre Vasilevsky in Tampa Bay. There's still time. Goalies take longer to develop. Gibson's playing at a high level already. It's ignorant to say that we should trade him and look elsewhere. I mean, you want to look at the goalies available in free agency and tell me somebody is better than John Gibson. Peter Budaj, Curtis McElhinney, Mike Condon, Chad Johnson, Brian Elliott. None of these guys are even close to John Gibson, and they're all almost over 30. So there's no option better than Gibson. No, I don't want to go with Bernier over Gibson. A lot of people have to just calm down. He has some flaws to his game. He likes to flop a little bit. There's times where he kind of seems to zone out and either lose the puck, which we saw in this series, or decide to go behind his net and grab his own stick during the play when it's still in your own zone. But these are things that you can work on as a young goalie. And the fact that he remained so calm in games is already a key asset to his play. And he has the ability to make big saves at big times. And I think there are some things that he obviously needs to work on, but he's, like I said, he's 23. He still has the chance to become an elite goaltender in the NHL, and I already believe he's getting up there as one of the top 15, top 10 goaltenders in the NHL. So there's no point in trading a guy like that. You can win a cup with this guy, and I think he's an integral part to their success in the future. And you have to keep him around. I think any talk of trading him or going out and finding another goaltender is just ignorant.
Yeah, and if you want to talk about big games, hey, Game 7 against Edmonton, Ducks won that game, right? Who was in net? Gibson was in net. So, don't sit there. I know some people go back and they point at some of these games and they say Gibson, yada yada yada. Well, don't forget all those Game 7s that the Ducks lost. That Gibson wasn't the goalie for all those games. Anderson actually was a goalie in some of those. Hiller was a goalie in some of those. So, when people get all, I know the season's over. We're all heated. We're upset. We're mad. We want to point the finger at all these people. I don't point the finger at Gibson at all. I think he played great. I mean, yes, there were some moments going and getting the stick. I was like, what the, are you doing? There are some times that there's odd man rushes and he does either go down early or overcommits. Yes, we have seen those things. Don't get me wrong. He's not perfect. He's young, but he's still a great goaltender. And he won that big game, the Game 7 game. I mean, obviously he's lost one too, but he's actually done it now. So I'm not worried about Gibson. I think there are some things that need to be tweaked. I think he's got to work on some stuff in the off season, but I think he is starting to mature a little bit better. And like you said, he's only 23. I still like what we got, and at only $2.3 million too. That's pretty good. So I'm fine with that. What I'm not fine with is the backup situation. And we had questions about that. Is Bernier coming back? Who's the backup going to be next year? Well, I'm pretty sure Bernier is not coming back. After that game 6, I'm sorry, he's not coming back. You want to talk about a poor performance? That was a poor performance. And again, I don't want to put it all on him. He hadn't played in a while. He was rusty. But I'm just saying, I highly doubt he's coming back, especially not for a $4 million price tag. So that's what I'm looking at, Eddie. Is I think the Ducks need to get a different backup goalie. And you mentioned some of the names out there. There's Chad Johnson, Mike Condon. Those are some options. Another option too is the Ducks promote Enroth. That may be another option. That's probably the least likely option, but that's another option. And I know you and I kind of get a little emotional here right now, but it just shows you how much that Eddie and I care about this team. And, just our thoughts about what's going on with everything. And you got to remember, these players are people too. It's tough. It's tough for me to sit here and tell you that Bernier was a big problem in Game 6, but it's the truth. He was. I don't want to single him out, but he was a big problem, and it sucks. It's unfortunate. And I know he's not happy. I'm pretty sure he's pissed off just like the rest of the team is, because some people think that the players don't take these things personal. They do. They really do take it. And this Ducks team, as Cogliano was talking about, is a really, really tight team. And you could see the frustration, Eddie, at the end of this game with them, going after some of the players on Nashville because they're frustrated. You saw Bieksa walk down the tunnel throwing sticks or at least banging against the wall. And you saw Perry was upset, Kessler's upset, and things like that you see. But that's how we feel, and that's why I kind of, when people take certain shots at Gibson, I get it. Some of you like certain people better, but I don't think he's the problem going forward. I think the Ducks need to get some stronger forwards, as you and I talked about, and a different type of backup goalie. But I'm still positive. I still think this team can make another deep run next year. I don't think this team needs to do a whole lot, Eddie. They're almost there. The other part of this equation, too, is some of the injuries. And again, not to make excuses, but it's just the way things went down. Unfortunately, a lot of the cards got stacked against the Ducks.
Yeah, and in referring to backup goalies, like you said, I think that's a need for them in this offseason. There's don't get me wrong, there's still a chance they do re-sign Jonathan Bernier, obviously for less than he was making before, most likely around $1 or $2 million, because he did play good during the regular season, and he was a big part of this team making the playoffs. And obviously he had the one game where he started and played bad in Game 6, and it was a big game, so it's something that everybody's going to remember. But there's a chance, there's not a lot of options this season as for goalies and unrestricted free agency for backups, but there are some options, and you look at a guy I think that would top the list is Peter Budaj. He's an unrestricted free agent. We remember how well he played in LA this year, and it's always difficult to pick a goalie up who played well in LA because you know how great defensively they are, so it's tough to see a guy come out of there and you never know if they're going to do well other places, but I think he's a suitable option if the Ducks want to go that way. Mike Condon, like we mentioned before, he's an option. He's an unrestricted free agent. He's still in the playoffs with Ottawa right now. Chad Johnson out of Calgary, he had a good season with Buffalo 2 seasons ago and then had a decent season with Calgary this year. And then I think another option is Anders Nielsen out of Buffalo. In a team that wasn't that great defensively, he played pretty well. He tops all unrestricted free agent goaltenders in save percentage, and he played 26 games this year. So he's also another option. He's only 27, so I think he'd be a good option as well for the Ducks to have his backup. But outside of Bernier, there are some suitable options, and I think it'll be interesting to see what the Ducks do to shore up that position.
Yeah, and just one last little point on that, too. If the Ducks do bring back Bernier, I'm not going to be upset. I know I kind of harped on him a little bit in this show in Game 6, but like you said, Eddie, he did great during the regular season, and he helped the Ducks get this far. And you can't overlook that. But it was more of in reference to people, harping so much on Gibson. If you're going to harp on him, well, you got to harp on Bernier, too. You got to spread it around here, you know what I mean, looking at what happened. And like you said, too, unfortunately, he was the one in Game 6, but the Ducks lost the other 3 games before that. So the team still did lose. There was a lot of other things going on. Specifically, the third periods were problematic for the Ducks at the latter part of this series. So just want to clear that up for a little bit. So I know everybody doesn't think I'm just a Bernier basher, but, if he does come back and it works out, that's good. He did good for the regular season, but like I said, if he doesn't, then that's a need that the Ducks are going to have to fill. Another way of filling some of the need for the Ducks too, Eddie, and a lot of people ask, is about some of the younger players. The Ducks had Max Jones and Steele and a couple other guys called up in case of this Game 6 that they were going to have to play with Raquel and Eves out, and they ended up not getting in the game. But people want to know, what are the chances of those two, maybe Nattinen and Larson, getting a chance to play next year? What do you think, as far as the Ducks trying to plug some holes if they don't go out and get some forwards via trade?
Yeah, I mean, as for Steele and Jones to start, I think there are kind of outside chances of making the team next year. I'd love to see either of them play. I think to start, they'd have to wow, coaches and staff at camp to begin with, and then from there, they'd have to get themselves the 9-game tryout or whatever it is before you burn an entry-level contract, or a year on your entry-level contract in the NHL. So I think if they were to wow in camp and then play well during those 9 games, there's a chance that they could stay on this team. And obviously it depends on the forwards that the Ducks acquire through either trade or through free agency in this offseason. But that'd be the only way they'd be making the team, in my opinion. The same goes for Nattinen as well. I think Nattinen will probably be in San Diego next year. Regina would love to have Sam Steele back and play in junior because they're hosting the Memorial Cup, and I'm sure London would love to have Max Jones back. So unless these guys come up and wow out of camp, I think there's a good chance they get sent back down to junior. As for Jacob Larson, I think there's a good chance he makes the team this season out of camp, if not gets a similar showing to what we've seen from Theodore 2 years ago and Montour this year, where he comes up when the Ducks need him, plays well, and ends up sticking in the lineup. And he obviously played a couple games at the beginning of this season, went back to Sweden, played well there, and I think there's a good chance that he could, be a mainstay. If any rookie for the Ducks right now has a good chance of making the lineup out of camp, I think it has to be Jacob Larson.
Yeah, I agree based upon what's happened recently. And, something that may change it a little bit is we learned that Sorensen signed a contract in a Swedish league, so he's now out of the picture. So that may, make some room for Jones or Steele. But kind of like you said, I think Steele's going to want to stay, and play that one more year out, like you said. So I would kind of look towards that. But, yeah, out of that group, Larson may be the one that might emerge out of that group, especially if the Ducks do make, some of those trades to move some defensemen around. So I would look for that. And, obviously it's all premature right now. We got to see what happens in the expansion draft and the regular draft and free agency and all that kind of stuff. But looking at it right now, I agree with you. I think he's the one that has the best chance, as we kind of preview the offseason and whatnot. Some of the other, I guess, remaining questions, Eddie, not so much about the team, but more about, I guess, the management and coaching. People ask about Murray and whether or not he'll be back next season, and people also want to know if we thought Carlyle was the right choice for this team. So, both of those, I think Murray's still going to come back. He's still done a hell of a job with this team. They still got far, only a couple wins away again from the Stanley Cup's final. So I think he'll be back. And I think Carlyle was the right choice. I mean, like we talked about earlier, the Ducks got over that 7-game, whatever you want to call it, curse, hiccup, whatever. They got over that hurdle. So they won that with Carlyle. Obviously, they couldn't get past Nashville in the Western Conference Final. But, with the way that Carlyle did things, especially those in-game changes and different things that he did, also not messing around with the goalie situation too much, I think he was the right choice, and I still think Murray and Carlyle are both the right choices going to next season.
Yeah, and I think Bob Murray kind of this season, with the way the Ducks played, I think he kind of got hit hard. I think he made a lot of great moves. Obviously, Vermette and Bull weren't at the top of the list, but I think getting Eves was. I think there was probably a little bit more they could have done to be a better team, but I think he sticks around. I don't know who else you would really replace him with. He's been a great general manager for years. I think he has to stick around. And as for Carlyle, I think he's earned the right to be here another season. Got him to a Western Conference Final, Game 6. Turned the way, showed that he's changed his ways from the past in some ways, and the Ducks, had a successful season despite a lot of people believing that they would either not make the playoffs or not really get that far, and they ended up getting one round away from the Stanley Cup final, and I think he's earned the right to be here for at least another season.
Yeah, I agree. I think that there shouldn't be any changes in the management structure right now. I think it should be fine. One other thing, I guess, coming up too is the regular draft's going to come up, Eddie, and we won't really go into who we think is going to be picked or whatnot. We'll kind of wait till it gets a little closer. But what's the situation in terms of the Ducks and their draft picks coming up?
So the Ducks lost their first round pick in the trade for Eves from Dallas because Eves played in half of their playoff games leading up into the Western Conference Final, and the fact that the Ducks made the Western Conference Final means that Dallas gets our first round pick instead of the second round pick. So now the Ducks do have their own second round pick. They have the second round pick that they got from Toronto in the trade for Frederick Anderson, which turned out to be San Jose's second round pick, which Toronto had previously acquired. They also have a third round pick, a fourth round pick, a fifth round pick, and no sixth or seventh round pick. So they do have 5 draft picks and 3 in the first 3 rounds. Obviously, no first round pick. So there's a potential to package those second round picks or package one with something else and move up into the late in the first round if they want to. Obviously both those second round picks will be late. It'll be San Jose will be around the middle of the pack, and the Ducks will be in the bottom 20s because of their finishing in the Western Conference Final. So they've got some options there. Obviously not the best options. It's tough, when you go out and to not have a first round pick to fall back on, but I think they'll be okay. They've got some young guys coming up, and hopefully they can hit on a couple of these second round picks and bring some more forwards into the fold.
And Murray's going to try and work that, like you said. I think he'll try to work either the second round pick, whether it's both of them together or that with one of those with the third or something. He's going to try and move up. Whether or not he gets it done, of course, that's another story. We saw him try, and we heard the reports of him trying to do it this last time, and it didn't work out. But that's something to keep an eye on too, is to see whether or not the Ducks do move up and get, like you said, a pick late in the first round. That's something to keep an eye on. But we'll have later podcasts in the summer as it comes up closer, and we'll talk about the draft in more detail and players that the Ducks may pick. And our writer Thomas does a good job going over all that stuff too. He's gone over a lot of stuff with the goals and whatnot, so we may see some more in-depth stuff there that we'll be able to cover and get you guys some info on that. Really, the only other news, Eddie, is who's Nashville going to play? We've got Pittsburgh and Ottawa battling it out. Before this series concluded, I really wanted to see the Ducks play to the Senators again. It would have been a 10-year reunion, going back to obviously 2007. And now it's going to be interesting. You got Pittsburgh that's on the verge here of winning, but they've had some blowout games back and forth. So who knows who's going to win this series? But I think you feel the same way I do. Is whoever wins that series, we hope beats Nashville.
Yeah, I mean, I would like Ottawa to come out and win this series. I think it's going to be difficult. Obviously, the injuries for Pittsburgh are piled up on the blue line, but their forward group is arguably the best still left in the playoffs. And I think the big key for tonight's game for Ottawa is if Erik Karlsson is ready to go. I haven't really seen much news, but to be honest, I haven't really looked up a lot of news on the Senators and if he's healthy. But he went out in game 5 with what appeared to be a twisted ankle. But you never know if they just didn't want him to come back. I believe it was 5-0 at the time. Is it worth bringing a guy back who's maybe laboring on an ankle and to miss him for Game 6? I think that's obviously key. If they're going to win this game, that he needs to be in the lineup. And then Craig Anderson's going to have to play great for them if they want to win this game. But it's going to be tough. Obviously Game 6 is in Ottawa. There's a little bit of a home ice advantage there. But Pittsburgh's shown that they really want to defend the Cup this year. And it's going to be tough to win 2 games straight, especially Game 7 in Pittsburgh.
Yeah, and that's what you got on tap there in the Eastern Conference. I'm kind of leaning towards, Pittsburgh again. Obviously, I like them as well, and there's a lot of former Ducks on there. But I won't be upset if they lose and Ottawa wins. If Ottawa wins, that's great. I just don't want Nashville to win. That's just my take. I mean, I know some people say, hey, if you lose to the team that won the championship, blah, blah, blah. But I just don't. I'm sorry. I can't root for Nashville. I just can't. So that's where we're stuck on that. But with that, we're going to wind up this show. Obviously, it's not the show we wanted to do previewing the offseason. We were hoping it was going to be the one previewing the Stanley Cup Final with the Ducks in it, and unfortunately, that didn't happen. But before we sign off, Eddie, I want to thank you for everything over the last, I don't even know how many years it's been. Because you were the one that came up with this idea when I was the one to say, nah, I don't think so. I'm not made for this. So I want to thank you for coming up with it, and always helping out and just being a great partner on this show for the last several years.
Well, it's been great. I mean, it's great to see how everybody enjoys it on Twitter, and obviously to see the viewers that we get, night in, night out, every time we release a podcast, and to get all the questions and the comments from everybody. It's great to see the continued support, and we'll continue to do them during the off season, cover the draft, cover the expansion draft, cover free agency, and then of course we'll be back again at the start of next season, and hopefully we can finish next season with the Stanley Cup win.
Yeah, exactly. And, of course, all of you listening out there really appreciate the support too. At the watch party for Game 6, Eddie, I had a guy come up and talk to me. I can't remember his name, unfortunately, but he came up to me, and he's in the U.S. Army for the last couple of years, and he was stationed in Korea last year, and said he really appreciated all the stuff that we do on the show and the posts and the articles and stuff like that. He said that it was hard to get a hold of news, back up in the U.S. about sports and whatnot over there. So he really appreciated the work that we did, and he would follow a lot of the Ducks updates to the stuff that we did. So it's really cool to see that this show reaches a lot of the places. I know we have people like in Australia that listen. There's people in Europe that follow the articles too, and different things like that. So it's not just the U.S. and Canada. We reach a lot of people, and we really appreciate it. We try to give you our objective and fair opinion of what we really see out there, and whatever news that we can get. If a player sends us some info, or a family member sends us some info, that's always good stuff. Which reminds me too is we still have shirts available. Josh Manson's parents actually contacted me and loved the Josh Manson shirt, which was a shocker. Received an email from Dave Manson, if you remember. He played in the NHL for a long time as well. So that shirt's up there. The Anaheim Against the World shirt, which is probably the most appropriate shirt right now, is up there. So check it out. Go to tpnhockey.com. You can go on there and get some of the shirts. Some of the older shirts are on there, and they're discounted as well. And again, just thank everybody for the support. Like Eddie said, we'll be doing some shows periodically over the summer. And as always, let's go Ducks.